Like, so you going out fishing, huh? I was like, you know, what was your first guess, right? And he's like, man, he's like, you're gonna have a tough time. He's like, I don't know if you're gonna do any good. There's no hoppers out right now, and the worms are done all froze up.
The worms done all froze up.
I'll give it a shot, man. I'll see what I can do. I came a long way. Well, I'm Mike Schmidt. I grew up in Detroit and spent all sorts of time throughout Michigan growing up. And then when I went to school, I ended up staying down in Columbus. I spent about 20 years in Columbus, working in corporate America as a project manager, and finally decided after 17 years that that wasn't going to do it for me anymore, and moved down to Florida to the beach and tie flies full time now. I really started fly fishing primarily once I was in college, and after college I kind of migrated completely to fly fishing almost exclusively. Growing up, I did a lot of fishing throughout Michigan. Again, I grew up right close to Lake St. Clair and spent a lot of time dragging worms around trying to catch walleye for dinner. But once I got out of school and got a fly rod and really started focusing on it, that was the way that I wanted to catch fish. So I've been doing that now since the mid-90s, really, and it's pretty much all I ever think about anymore is when I can get out on the water and chuck a fly around. Well, I kind of learned about big streamers just from, you know, being at a few different shows and seeing some things that really opened my eyes. There were some guys that were tying big stuff for muskie and pike. A lot of guys overseas, seeing some of what they've done has really been a big influence. And of course, a lot of the guys in Michigan that I grew up, you know, guys like Eli Brandt and Matt Krajewski and those guys that really put a lot of time and effort into developing a streamer game. It's just my favorite way to fish, so I spend a lot of time throwing streamers. And I think a lot of that for me, primarily growing up, if we weren't dragging crawler harnesses, we were throwing Rapalas for fish. And I loved fishing Rapalas growing up, so it just was a natural transition for me. Instead of fishing caddis patterns and dries, which I do enjoy, I really gravitated more towards fishing streamers when I had my choice. Streamer fishing will drive you crazy. It absolutely will drive you crazy. I think what draws me back every time is the active participation in fishing a streamer. You know, if you're fishing a dry fly, you're getting it out there, you're making your mends, you're trying to get the dry fly to imitate a bug, and that's great. I like more to actively fish a fly and make a fly dance the way that I want it to and perform the way that I want it to entice those fish to come out and just see the aggressive nature of those fish. Watching a big fish come out of nowhere and try and hammer a fly that's, you know, a good sized meal is just amazing to me. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a big fish. It's not uncommon that I'll be out fishing a 6-inch streamer and have 8 and 10-inch fish come and try and eat it. And sometimes they're successful, and you know, other times they just nip at it. But just being able to get out and see those big fish actively respond to what you're doing, or not, the fish will tell you what to do. You know, if the fish aren't responding, you have to physically change what you're doing with your presentation. Whereas in other forms of fly fishing, the fly does one thing, and you're trying to dead drift a fly. A dead drift is a dead drift. All you can do is change your fly. In streamer fishing, you can actively change your retrieve styles to get flies to do different things, and that's neat to me to see how fish react and to have to force yourself to change what you're doing to make the day successful. What's my favorite streamer? That's a loaded question, for sure. There's so many good streamers out there. I'm obviously fairly partial to some of the streamers that I've come up with and fished really well. Probably my favorite one that I've done is still the meal ticket. It was the first really good articulated streamer that I put together and worked on for a long time and made a lot of changes to over a couple of years, getting that fly to act exactly the way that I wanted it to. There's a lot of thought and a lot of changes made to get that fly. It was specifically created for fishing the Mad River in central Ohio, which has very deep undercut banks and very quick but short buckets that you have to drop a fly into. So I needed a fly that I could get down quick in certain spots, but still be castable and fishable on smaller weighted rods. So I really love fishing that fly. Of course, I'm a big fan of bucktail too, so all the big bucktail stuff out there has a place in my box forever. You know, for just that one tip for a streamer fisherman would just, you know, be to understand that every day is not going to be your day, and don't get down on yourself. Streamer fishing it's a sickness. It's absolutely a sickness. I mean, you can go out there and throw cast after cast after cast into places that look super fishy and never see a fish. And you can be in a place that's got so many fish per mile, you should be able to walk over the river and still not see a fish. And it's not necessarily something you're doing. You just have to keep after it. You know, keep your head up and just keep going. Because, you know, the one thing we were saying, even the last few days being on the river here, is, you know, it's always could be the next cast. You know, one more cast. Just keep doing it and have faith. And, you know, maybe change bugs out, but just keep going and don't get too down on what you're doing if it's not working, because it may not always work. You got to keep after it, and it can be a tough thing, but it's when it works, man, it's awesome. Yeah, the first fly I ever tied was a woolly bugger. I got into fly fishing after fly tying, actually. My degrees that I got in college were fine arts degrees. And when I moved to Columbus after school, I needed an artistic outlet because I was literally working on a computer all day in spreadsheets. So I started tying flies. And, you know, whether you start tying with a kit or you take a class, almost everyone that I know, the first thing they tied was a woolly bugger. And sure enough, that was me. I got my first thing was a Cabela's kit with a Thompson A. I threw a hook in and tied a woolly bugger, and the rest is history. My favorite material. You know, I use a lot of synthetics and I use a lot of natural stuff. I'm a big fan of incorporating both into flies. I'm still really partial to the natural materials when it comes right down to it. I'm a huge fan of marabou and I'm a huge fan of bucktail. I'm not sure that if I was forced to only tie with one ever again and not the other one, that I could choose between the two. They both have such great distinctive action in the water. And very similar, actually, just in different styles of water. You know, marabou has that very wavy, easy action in slower water, and bucktail acts very similarly. If you ever watch it underwater, it's very similar to marabou in the way that it moves and undulates in faster water. So that style of material, I think, is fantastic. And I couldn't pick between the two, but those two are probably my top materials. What do I struggle with? I mean, for a long time it was deer hair heads, and I worked at it a ton, and that's kind of eased up. I think some of the synthetic materials now are while they're consistent, they're very hard to tie with and make them look good. Most of the synthetics can be very slick. You know, I do get people asking me that, not as much as I would think. How you name your flies? I've got a notebook that sits on my shelf, And
Painful.
I just think just wacky, stupid combinations of names and words, and I put them in the notebook if they kind of catch my fancy. And so I've got right now a list of probably 50 different names that I may or may not use at some point. And the fly name is pretty important if you want to market a fly. So you've got to have something that's gonna make someone kind of giggle or at least have some reason to remember it. So if you're going to market it, you got to have a good name. So I keep a running list of names, and when I get a fly that has been proven out and tested and works well, and I wanna start using it, then I go in the book and I see what name kind of seems to fit the fly, and it sticks. There's usually one that jumps out, and that's as soon as you read it, that's the one you're going to use. So. Boy, where do I see this future of streamer fishing? I think you're going to see a split. I think you're going to see some guys go big, and I think you're going to see a lot go smaller. We had for a long time, it was kind of the arms race with tires. Is how big can you go and still be able to fish the streamer? And in some situations, big streamers are it. In other situations, it's getting tough to fish some of the big stuff. The fish start to get wise to the game. So it's fishing the stuff that's a little bit smaller and getting those flies to act the way you want. So I think you're going to see a lot of guys kind of scaling back some of their flies and really pushing the action on those flies in different directions. As a fly fisherman, we should not ignore other forms of fishing. And the best guys in the world at catching fish are the guys that are fishing for a living on bass tours and redfish tours. And seeing what those guys use and the action that they get is just something that we need to pay attention to, I think, in fly tying, and getting those flies that we're creating to mimic some of the action of what those guys are being successful with, and then incorporating that into our flies. I think that's we're going to see more and more of that as we progress and materials get pushed forward. You're going to see flies that have both natural and synthetic materials blended together and getting very specific actions, whereas before you would have a streamer that you could fish a couple of different ways. I think you're going to start to see more specialization in those streamers, and you're going to have things that are created to do one thing, and if that's not the one thing that you're looking for, you'll swap out to something else.